Okay, so we're live now, ready to continue with our exploration of the Sirens of Titan. We're now on chapter 2 and 3. And that is actually something we skipped in chapter 1 that I want to go back to and cover a little bit. We got introduced to some of the characters, and so we're gonna review that a little bit today. We'll talk a bit about these characters, at least the ones that show up in the first chapter. There's some new characters that show up in chapters 2 and 3, so we'll talk about them as well. But the one character that I guess I didn't have time to get to last time, was the Reverend Bobby Vinton. So let me find the page number where that's at, so I'm ready to go when we get to that part. He gives this rather high-spirited sermon, which is kind of fun. It's a few pages. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing. I'm very tempted to, because it's a pretty funny sermon. But it starts on page 25 if you have the book. So we'll get to that in a minute. But first off, let's look at the characters. So we did this last time, but I got a new PowerPoint going. Cast of characters. So remember, this takes place in, it's supposed to be in the future. The author just says it's after World War II and before the Third Great Depression. It seems like, at least by reading the first chapter, it's hard to tell. It seems like Winston Niles, spell Winston, right? Winston Niles Rumford, it seems like he's supposed to be the main character, but I don't think so. He's not the main character. The main character really is Malachi Constant. And I guess he gets more screen time, I guess you could say, use a sort of Hollywood term. He's more involved in the plot than any of the other characters. A close second, though, would be Rumford's wife, whose name is Beatrice. We find out later in the first chapter. But then there's the Reverend Bobby Denton. And I'm thinking Bobby Denton, that's the name of, like, I think I'm pretty sure that's the name of a singer, like from the 50s or the 60s or something, like some pop singer. Maybe it's Bobby Vinton that I'm thinking of. This is bugging me, so I gotta look this up. I'm gonna look this up on my phone. Yeah, maybe he wrote this, remember, in 1959, Vonnegut did. Bobby Vinton. It's spelled differently. The Bobby Vinton I'm thinking of is Vin. It's Vinton, not Denton. Okay, so yeah, I might do that. You might hear me say the Reverend Bobby Vinton, and I'm thinking of this freaking singer. What did he sing? Probably nothing you guys have ever heard of. He was big in the 1963 was his big hit. He wrote Jailhouse Rock, which Elvis Presley. Yeah, I don't even know these songs. Always in My Heart, You'll Never Forget, First Impression. I don't know these songs. Yeah. Roses Are Red, Roses Are Red, my love. Violets are blue. I know that one. Yeah. He's a real sappy. I don't know if Vonnegut meant to do that. If that was a sort of, but the Reverend Bobby Denton is not anything like Bobby Vinton, I don't think. So we didn't talk about him at all last time. But so the characters, right? We're in the future, whatever that means. Winston Niles Rumford. Yeah, he's the guy that is he's stuck in the let me see if I can spell this correctly. He's stuck in the spell with a C. Synclastic infundibulum. Okay. For those of you who were not here last time, you better watch the lecture video. I'm not going to explain the chronosynclastic infundibulum again. It's on page, let me find where it's at. It's on page 8 where you get an explanation of the chronosynclastic infundibulum. But basically, Winston is Mr. Rumford. He's stuck in this portal, this sort of wave that stretches between Earth and Mars, and I think is what it is. Maybe it's the sun and Mars. And every 59 days, he rematerializes on Earth. And so he's able to be on Earth physically. He shows up at this mansion, and then he's there just for a few minutes, and then poof, again, he's somewhere else. And he's able to see time differently, and he knows what's going to happen in the future. At least within his own lifetime. We'll find out a little bit more about that in chapter 2 when he gets into a bit of an argument with his wife. And he's invited Malachi Constant to the mansion because he has a message for Malachi Constant. He says that Malachi is going to basically end up on Mars, and then he's going to go to Mercury, and then back to Earth, and then he's going to spend the rest of his days on Titan. And not only that, but he is going to have a child with Rumford's wife, with Beatrice. And Beatrice, both Beatrice and Malachi are quite disgusted by this proposition. Nevertheless, Rumford is quite assured that, yeah, this is going to happen. This is inevitable, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. One other detail that I don't want to dwell on too much today that's important that I don't think we covered last time, that well, the detail changes a bit in chapter 2 and 3, but it's kind of funny. Malachi Constant is told, or he maybe he revealed, or he remembers that he actually owns a spaceship that's just kind of sitting in a warehouse. It's called the Whale, and Rumford says that that ship is the one that's going to fly him up to, to take him away. And he sort of laughs and says, whatever, like that thing is just sitting in a warehouse gathering dust, and I'm going to sell it now. And he does sell it. He gets rid of it. And anyway, Rumford says, no, you're going to fly up in it. They're going to change the name from the Whale to Rumford. There might be some biblical reference to the whale there. The story of Jonah and the whale. Jonah was told by God. I've mentioned Jonah before, I think, when we were talking about Kierkegaard. Story of Jonah, who was told by God to go warn the Ninevites, to go to Nineveh to warn the Ninevites to there was like a big storm coming or something, or they needed to be good, or I forget exactly what he was supposed to warn them about, but he didn't want to. He was Jewish, he was Hebrew, he was an Israelite. He's not supposed to intermingle with the Gentiles, with the non-Israelites. So he stubbornly tried to avoid his mission. Jonah did, and he got into a lot of trouble at sea. God threw down thunder and lightning, and the ship was capsized, and Jonah was swallowed by a whale and had to spend 40 days and 40 nights in the belly of the whale until he spit up and said, okay, fine, God, I'll go warn the Ninevites. And he did. So I don't know if that's some sort of reference to Jonah with the whale. But anyways, this is the spaceship that is supposed to carry off Malachi. Remember what does his name mean? Who remembers? Malachi Constant. What does that mean?
I think it's something about a message or the messenger.
Right. It means faithful messenger. Which is kind of weird because once we learn more and more about Malachi's character, he doesn't seem like the man for the job. He doesn't seem like a faithful messenger, right? He's this millionaire playboy who he seems to spend most of his days just chasing women and getting drunk, it seems like. In fact, he turns that up a notch in chapter 2 to kind of, I guess, go against his fate, or at least what Rumford says is his fate, that he's going to travel to all these different, planets and moons and all these things. So, and Beatrice, we talked about her a little bit we'll see more about her in chapter and the chapters we're covering today. She gets into a bit of an argument with Rumford. You know, we learn what happens 59 days later, the second, you know, the next time he materializes, when she confronts him. Normally she doesn't even want to see him. She's so disgusted by her husband. She feels like she's been abandoned by him, and he's a horrible husband. And maybe he is a bad husband. He kind of admits this. You know, he says this in the chapter, doesn't he? But let's get back to, this is chapter 1. I want to move on, but let's get back to the chronosynclastic infundibulum. So remember, this is this discovery. Rumford just ran into it with his spaceship. So he, you know, just to call it a discovery is, it's not like we were even looking for it. But it's this place in the universe where all views coalesce and everybody can be right in the same way and can kind of understand how it all fits together. So Rumford is in this place, and once it's discovered, the author, the narrator, tells us that what this did was it gave a message to mankind. This is at the top of page 26. The discovery of the chronosynclastic infundibula said to mankind, in effect, what makes you think you're going anywhere? All right, what makes you think you're going anywhere? And remember, this is something that is I guess, an underlying philosophy of the book that's presented in the very opening pages. Vonnegut, or at least whoever this author, you know, whoever the narrator is supposed to be for Vonnegut, this omniscient narrator of the future, they seem to think of space travel as silly. All it brings us is empty heroics, high drama, and what is the third one? Needless death or something like that. And so he has this very low estimation of space travel. And so the discovery of the chronosynclastic infundibulum, you know, that shows us kind of the truth of how everything kind of fits together. This is a simplification of it, by the way. Review last lecture, review the passage to get a better grasp of this concept of the chronosynclastic infundibulum. But once this is discovered, it's sort of you know, it's seen as a message to us that this is as far as you're going to get. There's nowhere else to go. All this crawling outward, this outwardness, is a waste of your time. The real journey is inward to the 53 portals of the soul, or whatever the number was at the beginning of the book. So continuing where I left off, it was a situation, you know, when this discovery, this sort of block, just stop looking, right? This was a situation made to order for American fundamentalist preachers. They were quicker than philosophers or historians or anybody to talk sense about the truncated age of space. And so even though I think this character, Bobby Denton, is supposed to be a bit silly, he's a bit comical, hilarious, he's to be made fun of, I suppose. Vonnegut has his ticks with him. We'll see his sermon here in a minute. I think that in a way, as much as Vonnegut himself in real life seemed to have a distaste for religion, especially organized religion, he seems to be throwing religion a bit of a bone here, right? That the more spiritually minded, the religious minded, they were steps ahead of people. They kind of saw what was really the meaning of this discovery. And I like this sermon. It has some biblical references that might need explaining, but let's see the sermon of the Reverend Bobby Denton here. So 2 hours after the firing of the whale was called off indefinitely, right? That's the ship that now Malachi Constant owns, that is just sitting in a warehouse. The Reverend Bobby Denton shouted at his love crusade in Wheeling, West Virginia. And here's his sermon. I don't know if I'll read this whole thing, but let me get a sip of water. I'm going to try. It's a couple pages, so. And I don't know if I can do a West Virginia accent. I'll just try my Southern accent. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And they began to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon all the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, just because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. What's he talking about here? This is a very short episode in the Bible. It's a very short passage in Genesis. What's he talking about here? What were the people building?
A tower?
Right, the Tower of Babel. Right. So the story goes is that human beings we were all one. It was like, I don't know, like I guess what all the conspiracy theorists think of when they talk about the New World Order and Illuminati. You know, it's like one big nation, and we're all united under a language, and we all united to build this tower way up to the sky to try to reach heaven through our technology, to try to reach heaven through physical building or whatnot. And so God looked down on us and said, silly humans, you can't do that. So he went down and confused our language and made us all separate into different nations and speak different tongues and all this. And there are many different interpretations of that passage from the Bible, but one popular one is that, yes, this is man trying to use technology, trying to use science to reach the universal truths, to reach heaven. But that's silly. You can't build a tower. You can't build a ladder to heaven. Heaven is a spiritual place, you know, and so this is beside the point. There are also some racist interpretations of it also, like God doesn't want us to mix. He wants us to stay separate or something like that. But I think Mr. Bobby Denton here is going with the kind of, let's be humble about our capacity here. Let's be humble about what we can do. Bobby Denton spitted his audience on a bright and loving gaze and proceeded to roast it whole over the coals of its own iniquity. Are these not Bible times? He said. Have we not builded of steel and pride an abomination far taller than the Tower of Babel of old? And did we not mean, like those builders of old, to get right into heaven with it? And haven't we heard it said many times that the language of scientists is international? They all use the same Latin and Greek words for things, and they all talk the language of numbers. This seemed a particularly damning piece of evidence to Denton, and the Love Crusaders agreed bleakly without quite understanding why. So why should we cry out in surprise and pain now that God says to us what he said to the people who builded the Tower of Babel? No, get away from there. You aren't going to heaven or anywhere else with that thing. Scatter, you hear? Quit talking the language of science to each other. Nothing will be restrained from you which you have imagined to do, if all you keep on talking the language of science to each other. And I don't want that. I, your Lord God on high, want things restrained from you, so you will quit thinking about crazy towers and rockets to heaven, and start thinking about how to be better neighbors and husbands and wives and daughters and sons. Don't look to the rockets for salvation. Look to your homes and your churches. Bobby Denton's voice grew hoarse and hushed. You want to fly through space? God has already given you the most wonderful spaceship in all creation. Yes. Speed? You want speed? The spaceship God has given you gives 66,000 miles an hour. You'll keep on running that speed for all eternity if God wills it. You want a spaceship that will carry men in comfort? You got it. It won't carry just a rich man and his dog. or just 5 men or 10 men. No, God's no piker. He's given you a spaceship that will carry billions of men, women, and children. Yes, they don't have to stay strapped in chairs or wear fish bowls over their heads. No, not one on God's spaceship. Not on God's spaceship. The people on God's spaceship can go swimming. They can walk in the sunshine and play baseball and go ice skating. Go for family rides in the automobile on Sunday after church and a family chicken dinner. Bobby Denton nodded. Yes, he said. And if anybody thinks his God is mean for putting things out in space to stop us from flying out there, that's the chronosynclastic infundibulum, right? If anyone thinks God is mean for putting things out in space to stop us from flying out there, just let them remember the spaceship God already gave us. We don't have to buy the fuel for it, worry and fret over what kind of fuel to use. No, God worries about that. God told us what we had to do with this wonderful spaceship. He wrote the rules so anybody could understand them. You don't have to be a physicist or a great chemist or Albert Einstein to understand them. No, and he didn't make a whole lot of rules either. They tell me that to fire the whale, they would have to make 11,000 separate checks before they could be sure it was ready to go. Is this valve open? Is that valve closed? Is this wire tight? Is that tank full? And on and on and on to 11,000 things to check. Well, here on God's spaceship, God only gives us 10 things to check. And not for any little trip to some big dead poisonous stones in the sky, but a trip to the kingdom of heaven. Think of it. Where would you rather be tomorrow? On Mars or in the kingdom of heaven? And it goes on, and he gets the Love Crusaders, right? His choir into it, right? They go through the 10 Commandments, right? And sort of rocket ship up to heaven, right? Blast off after he gets to the first one, right? It's a riveting speech. I could go on, but I fear that we'll spend too much time here in chapter 1. But yeah, Bobby Denton is, I guess, kind of some comic relief that pops up from time to time in the book, and so I figure we mention him. He's a bit of a character himself. But I say this. I've said this before. I say it again. I'm not a religious person, but I somewhat share his sentiment. You heard me on Monday, kind of going off on all this. Why are we shooting rockets up into the sky when we can't even take care of our own cities? We can't even take care of our own people. You got homeless problems and unemployment problems, and it just seems like such a waste. But what do I know? Maybe we'll figure out how to feed all the homeless people when we get to Mars. I don't know, right? But I'm kind of with Bobby here, man. I think he's got some righteous points there. Anyway. So that's, again, kind of backtracking. Let's talk a bit about chapter 2, right? The title of chapter 2 is Shears in the Wire House. What's that all about? What's that a reference to?
I think the Wire House is a reference to how I forgot what his name was, but the way that he pronounces the word.
Right. It's some politician. I can't remember his darn name either. Now I'm stumped. He's not that important of a character. I think the only time he shows up is in this one chapter. But yeah, he mispronounces the word. What's the word he's really saying? He's not saying wire house. What's he saying? He's talking about chairs, not cheers. Chairs in a warehouse. Anyway. This is the problem of overproduction that is mentioned in the chapter, right? Things are being overproduced, basically. How does it start off? it starts off where chapter 1 ends, right? So I guess he's still at the mansion. The limousine zooms north out of Newport, turned down a gravel road, kept a rendezvous with the helicopter that was waiting. The purpose of Malachi Constant's switch from the limousine to the helicopter was to prevent anyone following him, to prevent anyone discovering who the bearded and bespectacled visitor to the Rumford estate had been. So he gets the hell out of there. Let's see here. Skipping a few pages, right? We flash forward to 59 days later. So remember, Winston Rumford, it's every 59 days that he shows up at the mansion. So this is 59 years later, 59 days later. Him and his dog materialize again. A lot had happened since then. For one thing, Malachi Constant had sold all of his holdings in galactic spacecraft. So he's trying to not be a part of this plan, right? He's remember that's the corporation that had custody of the whale. So he owned that ship, and he's like, oh crap, I own it. Well, I'm gonna sell it so that there's no way I'm gonna do what Rumford says I'm gonna do. He had done this to destroy every connection between himself and the only known means of getting to Mars. He had put the proceeds of the sale into Moon Mist tobacco. For another thing, Beatrice, so this is Rumford's wife, so they're both Malachi and Beatrice are both actively trying to what's the word I'm looking for? Prevent their fate from going forward. What they've been told is inevitable about their fate. She had liquidated her diversified portfolio of securities and put proceeds into shares of galactic spacecraft, intending thereby to get a leather-lunged voice in whatever was done with the whale. So she did the opposite. She bought that company so she could have a say-so on what was done with the spaceship and prevent it from taking her anywhere, taking her to Mars or wherever the heck she was supposed to go. For another thing, Malachi Constant had taken to writing Beatrice Rumford offensive letters in order to keep her away, in order to make himself absolutely permanently intolerable to her. To see one of these letters was to see them all. And and then it just shows one of the letters, and it's not even that bad. I think if Vonnegut was writing this book today, because I guess our standards of vulgarity, I guess after all of our former president's tweets or whatever, like our standard for what's shocking is a little bit higher or something. He probably would have written a little bit, because the letter is just like, hey baby, what's up, sweetie? Can't wait to check out your curbs on Mars, or something like that. But anyway, right, he's trying to make it so like, yeah, we're not having a kid together. Another thing, Beatrice had bought a capsule of cyanide, so she's going to poison herself if she was ever in the same time zone as Malachi. For another thing, the stock market had crashed, wiping out Beatrice Rumford, among other things. She had bought galactic spacecraft shares at prices ranging from 151.5 to 169. The stock had fallen to 6. So she pretty much lost everything. What about Malachi? What about his fortune? What happens to his fortune?
He also loses everything.
Right. Oh man, that sucks. You're breaking up pretty bad. Maybe you're in a bad location. How'd you put it? What happens? Can you try again?
He loses his company, the Magnum.
Yeah, Opus. Magnum Opus. Yeah, he loses everything. How does he do that though? Pretty much.
For one, he gives wells to some girls at a party, so
right.
That makes him go broke. And then the Moon Mist is also trying to, or the people who consume the tobacco are suing him because they can't reproduce.
Right, they're sterile. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So he basically parties for 59 days, right? Like this whole time he's been at his penthouse getting just shit-faced, basically, for lack of a better word. And as you said, he gets so drunk that he starts giving away oil wells to all the women at the party. Like he starts crying, and he pushes the piano into the freaking swimming pool, and he marries one of the women at the party or something like this. and she has a boyfriend who's in the mafia who's going to beat him up if he doesn't pay her the money he said he was going to. And like on top of it all, yeah, he loses the company because he invested in moon mist cigarettes, which make people sterile, right? I kind of I want to get to that. I want to get back to that, but there's something that I don't want to skip, because Beatrice and Rumford have a confrontation, and I think this somewhat redeems his character a little bit. You know, he seems like, geez, that Rumford guy, he's just this rich, eccentric guy who flew a spaceship into this chronosynclastic infundibulum. His poor wife has been left all alone. I mean, yeah, she's rich, but like, she's kind of disgraced because she's got this weird eccentric husband. He's not really taking care of her like men are supposed to take care of their woman. You know, this is written in the 1950s. So he's not really holding up his sort of manly duties, to sort of use those old stereotypes. But I think in this chapter 2, and this sort of confrontation they have, you know, he kind of levels with her. He tells her what her fate is. He says there's really nothing she can do about it. And, you know, this is on 47. I don't know if this is exactly what I was looking for, but they get into this sort of this conversation because somebody claimed that they were the bearded man. They claim, you know, remember Malachi Constant was in disguise. He was wearing a beard. So this actual person comes out and lies and says that they were the person. Oh, I was the one that was there. And he makes all this money. What was his name? Kurabdubian, I think is the guy's name. And he basically makes all these predictions that like in the year 10 million, there'll be a tremendous house cleaning all records relating to the period, because there'll be too much information, that there won't be enough place to store the information, that they'll just erase everything between the year of the death of Christ and the year 1 million AD. And basically, there'll just basically be a note saying, following the death of Jesus, there was a period of readjustment that lasted for 1 million years. That just sums it all up, right? And so they're kind of contemplating, like, she asked him, well, do you know when the human race will end? And he's like, I don't know. I just know it's going to happen within my own lifetime. It's going to happen after I die. I can kind of see all these events, you know, past, present, and future. And yeah, right. Stephanie in the comments says he describes her life as a roller coaster, right? It's like, there's really not much you can do about it. Even if I told you it was going to happen, when it was going to happen, maybe you'd be able to brace yourself and you would know when there'd be a peak or a dip. But those peaks and those dips and those turns are going to happen. You know, you're stuck in the chair basically, right? So yeah, good point. I don't know if that's the passage I'm about to read here, but he's basically asking, you know, what was your guess? You know, when do you think the human race will be extinct? And he says, you know, she says, what? He says, well, guess how long the human race will be around, said Rumford. From between Beatrice's clenched teeth came a frail, keen, sustained note so high as to be almost above the range of the human ear. The sound bore the same ghastly promise as the whistle of fins on a falling bomb. That's a macabre description. Then the explosion came. Beatrice capsized her chair, attacked the skeleton, threw it crashing into the corner. Remember, she has all these specimens, right? The dog skeleton attached and all these other weird skeletons and specimens. She cleaned off the shelf of Skip's museum, right? That's where all this stuff's kept there in the house, bouncing specimens off the wall, trampling them on the floor. Rumford was flabbergasted. Good God, he said, what do you want? Or what made you do that? Don't you know everything? Said Beatrice hysterically. Does anybody have to tell you anything? Just read my mind. Rumford put his palms to his temples, his eyes wide. Static. All I get is static, he says. What else would there be but static, said Beatrice. I'm going to be thrown right out in the street without even the price of a meal. Right? Because remember, she's broke as well now, too. Like, she put all her shares in this company that went true belly up, basically. My husband laughs and wants me to play guessing games. It wasn't any ordinary guessing game, said Rumford. It was about how long the human race was going to last. I thought that might sort of give you more perspective about your own problems. The hell with the human race, said Beatrice. You're a member of it, you know, said Rumford. Then I'd like to put in for a transfer to the chimpanzees, said Beatrice. No chimpanzee husband would stand by while his wife lost all her coconuts. No chimpanzee husband would try to make his wife into a space whore for Malachi Constant of Hollywood, California. Having said this ghastly thing, Beatrice subsided some. She wagged her head tiredly. How long is the human race going to be around, master? I don't know, said Rumford. I thought you knew everything, said Beatrice. Just take a look at the future. I look at the future, said Rumford, and I find that I shall not be in the solar system when the human race dies out. So the end is as much a mystery to me as it is to you. That's not the passage I was looking for. Let me skip forward then again to the passage I was looking for. This is where he tells his wife, she says, let's back up a bit to the part I think this is on 53. This is at the middle of 53. Rumford had known that Constant would try to debase the picture. Okay, so he's looking in the magazine and he sees an ad for Moon Mist cigarettes, the cigarettes that ended up getting people sick. And now there's a class action lawsuit against Malachi Constant, and there's no way he's ever going to get out of that one. Remember the picture of the three Sirens of Titan, the three women, the golden woman, the white woman, and the brown woman, I think were the three colors. He used that image in an ad for the cigarettes. And Rumford says, he knew that Constant would try to debase the picture by using it in commerce. Constant's father had done a similar thing when he found out that he could not buy Leonardo's Mona Lisa at any price. The old man had punished Mona Lisa by having her used in an advertising campaign, but for suppositories. It was the free enterprise way of handling beauty that threatened to get the upper hand. That passage, I don't know why, I just made me think of Amy Winehouse. This is one reason I just hate the music industry. And I couldn't watch that movie, Amy, the documentary about Amy Winehouse, because I thought, what a beautiful talent. What an amazing, soulful human being. And I didn't like the documentary because it was just the drugs. The drugs. She did drugs, and it's just too bad she didn't go to rehab. The reason she did drugs is because I think the industry killed her soul, right? They took her beauty and her talent and they tried to popularize it and turn it into something commercial and overproduce it. And she didn't like the way they did her music, and it made her feel like she sold her soul out. And so I'm totally digressing and going off on a tangent here, but yeah, I'm talking. He's talking about taking beauty, how free enterprise handles beauty by threatening it when it starts to get the upper hand. This beautiful singer, we're going to market her and make as much money off of her as possible. So Rumford made a buzzing sound on his lips, which was a sound he made when he approached compassion. The compassion he approached was for Malachi Constant, who is having a far worse time of it than Beatrice, right? Because remember, Malachi's waking up with a 59-day hangover, realizing that his whole fortune is gone. He's completely broke, and there's no way getting out of it. Have I heard your whole defense? Said Beatrice, coming behind Rumford's chair. Her arms were folded, and Rumford, reading her mind, knew that she thought of her sharp projected elbows as bullfighters' swords. I beg your pardon, said Rumford. This silence, this hiding in the magazine, this is the sum total of your rebuttal, said Beatrice. Rebuttal? A punctual word if there ever was one, said Rumford. I say this, and then you rebut me, then I rebut you, then someone else comes in and rebuts us both. He shuddered. What a nightmare where everyone gets in line to rebut each other. This kind of comes back to his position. Remember, he's in the chronosynclastic infundibulum. So he can see how everyone's right and he can see how everyone's wrong in their own little way. But she is thinking punctually, right? What a punctual word. Rebuttal. Punctual. She exists as a point. He exists as this, I guess, process outside of time. He exists in all time, past, present, future. Couldn't you this very moment, said Beatrice, give me stock market tips that would enable me to gain back everything I lost and more? If you had one shred of concern for me, couldn't you tell me exactly how Malachi Constant of Hollywood is going to try to trick me into going to Mars so I could outwit him? Look, said Rumford, this is the passage you were talking about, Stephanie. Life for a punctual person is like a roller coaster. He turned to shiver his hands, he turned to shiver his hands in her face. All kinds of things are going to happen to you. Sure, he said. I can see the whole roller coaster you're on. And sure, I could give you a piece of paper that would tell you about every dip and turn, warn you about every bogeyman that was going to pop out at you in the tunnels. That wouldn't help you any. I don't see why not, said Beatrice. Because you'd still have to take the roller coaster ride. I didn't design the roller coaster. I don't own it. I don't say who rides and who doesn't. I just know what it's shaped like. And Malachi Constant is part of the roller coaster. Or that's Beatrice, she asked. And Malachi Constant is part of the roller coaster, she asked. Yes, said Rumford. And there's no avoiding him, said Beatrice. No, said Rumford. Well, suppose you tell me then just what steps bring us together, said Beatrice, and let me do what little I can. Rumford shrugged. All right, if you wish, he said, if it would make you feel better. At this very moment, he said, the President of the United States is announcing a new space age to relieve unemployment. Billions of dollars are going to be spent on unmanned spaceships just to make work. The opening episode in this new space age will be the firing of the whale in my honor. The whale will be renamed the Rumford in my honor. This is happening next Tuesday. It will be loaded with organ grinder monkeys and will be fired in the general direction of Mars. You and Constant will both take part in the ceremonies. You will go on board for a ceremonial inspection, and a faulty switch will send you on your way with the monkeys. It is worth noting that the narrative at this point to say that this cock and bull story told to Beatrice is one of the few instances of Winston Niall Rumford's having told a lie. So he's actually lying. This is not completely the truth. This much of Rumford's story was true. The whale was going to be renamed and fired on Tuesday, and the President of the United States was announcing a new age of space. Some of the president's comments at the time bear repeating. It should be remembered that the president gave the word progress a special flavor by pronouncing it proggers, right? He's the one that says shears in the wire house. He also flavored the words chair and warehouse, pronouncing them cheer and wirehouse. And then I'm not going to read his speech, but he goes on and on about how there's too much stuff and not enough people to consume it. We've got this overproduction. We've got a bunch of chairs in the wirehouse. Actually, I will read that one part of the president's speech. He says, one man in particular I remember was a cheer manufacturer, and he had way overproduced, and all he could think about was those cheers in the wirehouse. And I said to him, in the next 20 years, the population of the world is going to double. With all those billions of new people, they're going to need things to sit down on. So you just hang on to those cheers. Meanwhile, why don't you forget about those cheers in the wirehouse and think about the proggers in space? Okay, so that's still not the passage I was looking for, right? Again, the passage I'm looking for, maybe this is close to the end of this is the end of the chapter, closer to the end of the chapter, where actually it is, now that I'm getting to the end of the chapter. This is page 60. He kind of like says her name B, he kind of pauses. If I seem indifferent to your misfortunes, it's only because I know how well things are going to turn out in the end. If it seems crude of me not to hate the idea of your pairing off with Constant, it's only a humble admission on my part that he's going to make you a far better husband than I ever was or will be. Look forward to being really in love for the first time, B. Look forward to behaving aristocratically without any outward proofs of your aristocracy. Look forward to having nothing but the dignity and intelligence and tenderness that God gave you. Look forward to taking those materials and nothing else and making something exquisite with them. Rumford groaned tinnily. He was becoming insubstantial, so he started to disappear again. Oh God, he said, you talk about roller coasters. Stop and think sometime about the roller coaster I'm on. Someday on Titan, it will be revealed to you just how ruthlessly I've been used, and by whom, and to what disgusting, paltry ends. Kazak, that's the dog, Kazak now flung himself into the house, flews flapping, right? His little, cheeks flapping. He landed skidding on the polished floor. He ran in place, trying to make a right angle turn in Beatrice's direction. Faster and faster he ran, and still he could get no traction. He became translucent. He began to shrink, to fizz crazily in the foyer floor like a ping pong ball in a frying pan. Then he disappeared. There was no dog anymore. Without looking behind, Beatrice knew that her husband had disappeared too. Kazak, she said firmly or faintly. She snapped her fingers as though to attract a dog. Her fingers were too weak to make a sound. Nice doggy, she whispered. So the third chapter, right? Chapter 2, we learn about what a crappy or not so crappy husband Rumford is, and how the fortunes of both Beatrice and Malachi have completely reversed, right? They're both desperately broke. They have no idea what they're going to do. Beatrice kind of devises a plan. She starts selling tickets to watch the what do they call them? The materializations. She starts selling tickets to this. And so that sort of helps her out a bit. But in chapter 3, we learn a little bit about Malachi's father. And so what was his father's name? Does anybody remember? I can find this pretty quickly. What was Malachi's father's first name? Noel, right? Noel Constant. I'm not sure if that has any sort of significance. The word Noel, I don't know if that has any sort of. So we learn about his sort of history. We learn a little bit about his family history. Where did the money come from? Why is Malachi, who seems to be just this sort of drunken eccentric, how did he get so rich? Like, what's his sort of secret? So we learn the story about his father, but we also meet another character who's pretty interesting, who I don't think shows up again. I think he's only in chapter 3. Ransom K. Fern, who is, I don't know what his title is. Oh, he's the president of Magnum Opus. I think it's LTD or something like that. Today it would be LLC, I think is probably what they would, if Vonnegut was writing this book in 2021, it'd be Magnum Opus LLC. Who remembers who got this far in reading, who read chapter 3? It's kind of insane how his father made the money. How did he make the money?
He bought stocks using the first sentence of in Genesis.
Yeah, right.
So like he did that in the beginning, and then took those letters and like put them together, and then found the companies with those letters.
Right. So he was some traveling sales guy who was sort of like, I guess, at the end of his rope. He was sort of, I don't care about life. This sucks. I don't know what to do. And I think his uncle or somebody had died and left him some money while he was doing this traveling sales bit. And so he's staying in this hotel, or it's actually just a little motel, I think. It's nothing fancy. Room 226, I think, or something like that. I keep remembering, 223. It's a hotel. It's the Wilbur Hampton Hotel. I think Wilbur Hampton is actually a really fancy hotel in England, but this is not the famous one. This is like a knockoff, it's like a cheap version of the Wilbur Hampton. And where is it at? It doesn't say where it's at. I don't know if this is supposed to also be in Rhode Island, where the mansion is. It's probably somewhere in the Northeast, I'm guessing. So the guy, again, he's a traveling salesman. He gets this inheritance, which is not much. I think he gets like $1,000 or something, which is, I guess, a lot for back then, but it's, he can't retire on it. But so he's like, okay, I got $1,000. I'm going to use this to invest in the stock market. And he finds a Bible in the hotel room, and he uses. This is how he does it. As you said, he takes the first sentence of the Bible, of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, or whatever the first sentence is. And this is on page 71. He takes every letter and turns it into initials. So in the beginning, right? INTHEBEG. right, in the beginning, until he has the whole thing. So his very first investment was IN. And if you look at the stock market, they've got the initials. IN at that time was International Nitrate. After that, Trowbridge Helicopter. After that, Electra Bakeries, Eternity Granite, Indiana Novelty, Norwich Iron, National Gelatin, Granada Oil, Delmar Creations, Richmond Electroplating, Anderson Trailer, Eagle Duplicating. These are all just made up fictitious companies that Vonnegut made up, but it's kind of ingenious and clever. But his rule was that he basically invested in those companies till he doubled all his earnings, or he doubled his shares doubled in value. Then he sold them and went on to the next company. He does this for a while until I think he ends up buying a few companies that he actually invests in and cares about and actually sort of takes an interest in. And, this strategy works and works and works for quite a long time. Who is Ransom K. Fern, though? He's the president of Magnum Opus, but how'd they meet? He met Malachi Constant's father, but what's the sort of impetus for their meeting?
Fern used to work for the government, I guess. Right. And he somehow looked at the financial of what's his name? Noel Constant.
Yeah.
And then he just showed up to room 223, and somehow he managed to become president after a talk.
Right.
He was impressed by his work and how he was rich.
And he thought that, and this is another point that I think he makes that might be an underlying thesis of this book, is that it has a lot to do with luck. And he wasn't lucky himself, Ransom K. Fern. He knew he wasn't lucky. He was smart. He had the skills. I think he was working, like you said, he was working for the government, like I think the IRS or taxes or whatever the heck he was doing. And he was able to see the finances of certain people. And he knew the books and he knew that. But to be successful and actually get rich and successful, he couldn't do without luck. He wasn't a lucky person. He needed to find someone who was lucky. And that was Noel or Noel. We are introduced to Ransom K. Fern at the beginning of the chapter, though, because Malachi Constant is at the bottom of his luck, right? He's lost everything, and he's forced to kind of pull himself together, even though he's still hungover after all these days of partying and giving away oil wells. And he basically gets a big talking to by Ransom K. Fern. He says, "What a disgrace! Your dad would be ashamed. You're such a loser. I even had a backup plan that I knew you were an idiot. So I sort of had a backup plan, but you ruined the backup plan by selling those oil wells. Those oil wells were the backup plan. You're a freaking moron, And so he basically just leaves the office, and Malachi is just stuck there. He's like, I forwarded all the phone calls to your office, so you can answer them now. I've got my retirement. I'm going, and I'll never see you again, you stupid idiot. And that's sort of how the chapter begins. But then we get this backstory, right? We get the story of his father, and we hear about how he just becomes lucky. He just uses this sort of random investment method, for lack of a better word, using the Bible, turning every word into initials and investing that way, and he becomes super wealthy. but I'm trying to find, if you find it before I do, don't be shy, chime in. Trying to find the scene where Ransom first meets Noel. Oh, here it is. It starts, I think, around 74. I mean, it starts a little bit before that. You know, it mentions how Noel never left that hotel room. He hired a woman, basically, I guess a prostitute, for lack of a better word, an escort, who would come visit him every 10 days and kind of, you know, take care of him, you know, whatever that means. And they ended up having a kid, Malachi, but he never even met him except one time. So he was kind of a bad father. He's like, yeah, I'll just give you money, take care of the kid, whatever. So he never really left the hotel room. But this scene describes, you know, when he gets a visitor, one of the only visitors he ever got besides that woman. And it was this Ransom K. Fern character. And so he knocks on the door, he comes and he says, I've been over your income tax reports for the past 2 years, he says, and by my calculations, you are the luckiest man who ever lived. Lucky, said Noel Constant. I think so, said the young visitor. Don't you think so? For instance, what does Elko Hoist Company manufacture? Elko Hoist, said Noel Constant blankly. You own 53% of it for a period of 2 months. So he doesn't even know what he's investing in. I think, you know, Ransom kind of knows something's up. He's like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like his investment strategy has no rhyme or reason. And the name Noel is related to Christmas, right? Or it means Christmas. I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. That's what I'm trying to think of. Like, how does this, you know, I guess here I am, you know, Christmas time, you know, Christmas is every day if you're Noel. If you're Noel, I have trouble. I'm sure I grew up in San Antonio. And so I grew up, most of my friends are Hispanic. So I keep saying Noel, but I'm almost certain that Noel is probably the more Anglo way of saying it. And this dude's supposed to be some white dude. So, but forgive my saying Noel. I'm a San Antonio boy, so you gotta forgive me. But yeah, I don't know what the deal is. You know, Christmas, I guess maybe that's the symbolism. It's, you know, he's getting presents every day just because he's a lucky boy. So, you know, Ransom's kind of calling him out. He's kind of saying, look, you don't know what the fuck you don't know what you're doing, and I kind of do. You've got the luck, I've got the know-how. And he said, you know, suppose you tell me what it is you learned about Indiana Novelty that made you think it was a shrewd investment. Did you think they made little paltry party poppers with paper hats inside? And so Noel is getting kind of, he's like, why are you asking me all these questions? You know, do I have to describe every company I invest in and why I did it? Because I was simply asking for my own curiosity. From your reaction, I can gather that you haven't the remotest idea what Indiana Novelty does. For your information, Indiana Novelty manufactures nothing, but it holds certain key patents on the tire recapping machinery. And he says, suppose we get down to the Bureau of Internal Revenue business, said Noel Constant curtly. He's like, oh, come on. What do you want? All right. What do you want? You know, what are you here for? Am I in trouble? Do I have to pay a fine? I'm no longer with the Bureau, said the young visitor. I've resigned my $114 a week job this morning in order to take a job making $2,000 a week. Working for whom? Said Noel Constant. Working for you, said the young man. He stood, held out his hand. Ransom K. Fern is the name, he said. I had a professor in the Harvard Business School, said young Fern to Noel Constant, who kept telling me that I was smart, but that I would have to find my boy if I was going to be rich. He wouldn't explain what he meant. He said I would catch on sooner or later. I asked him how I could go looking for my boy, and he suggested that I work for the Bureau of Internal Revenue for a year or so. When I went over your tax returns, Mr. Constant, it suddenly came to me what he meant. He meant I was shrewd and thorough, but I wasn't remarkably lucky. I had to find somebody who had luck in an astonishing degree, So I have. Why should I pay you $2,000 a week? Said Noel Constant. You see my facilities and my staff here. You know what I've done with them. Yes, said Fern, and I can show you where you should have made 2 million where you only made 59. Or sorry, 200 million where you only made 59. You know absolutely nothing about corporate law or tax law or even common sense business procedure. Fern thereupon proved this to Noel Constant, father of Malachi, and Fern showed him an organized plan that had the name Magnum Opus Incorporated. Sorry, it's Incorporated, not LTD. It had the name Magnum Opus Incorporated. It was a marvelous engine for doing violence to the spirit of thousands of laws without actually running afoul of so much as a city ordinance. Noel Constant was so impressed by this monument to hypocrisy and sharp practice that he wanted to buy stock in it without even referring to his Bible. Mr. Constant, sir, said young Fern, don't you understand? Magnum Opus is you. With you as chairman of the board and with me as president. Mr. Constant, I'm going to have to end class with this because I know we're out of time, but he gives this beautiful tirade in favor of corporate bureaucracy. Okay. I'm going to read this and I'll have to stop at this, but here's his sort of elevator pitch to Noel Constant. Mr. Constant, he said, right now you're as easy for the Bureau of Internal Revenue to watch as a man on a street corner selling apples and pears. But just imagine how hard you would be to watch if you had a whole office building jammed to the rafters with industrial bureaucrats, men who lose things and use the wrong forms and create new forms and demand everything in quintuplicate, and who understand perhaps a third of what is said to them, who habitually give misleading answers in order to gain time in which to think, who make decisions only when forced to, and who then cover their tracks, who make perfectly honest mistakes in addition and subtraction, who call meetings whenever they feel lonely, who write memos whenever they feel unloved, men who never throw anything away unless they think it could get them fired. A single industrial bureaucrat, if he is sufficiently vital and nervous, should be able to create a ton of meaningless papers a year for the Bureau of Internal Revenues to examine. In the Magnum Opus building, we will have thousands of them, and you and I can have the top 2 stories, and you can go on keeping track of what's really going on the way you do now. He looked around the room. How do you keep track now, by the way? Writing with a burnt match on the margins of a telephone directory? In my head, said Noel Constant. Now, there's one more advantage I have yet to point out, said Fern. Someday your luck's going to run out, and then you're going to need the shrewdest, most thorough manager you can hire, or you'll crash all the way back to pots and pans. And this is basically what happens, right? But of course, Noel did not live to see that day, and it's his son that has to deal with this. But apparently, he left him a special message in his hotel room, which Malachi's going to go read now. But we're out of time, so we can't get into that. But that's the end of chapter 3. And there's still a lot more to talk about in the plot. So, as he's going to the hotel, we're introduced to a couple new characters who are minor incidental characters, but they're interesting nonetheless. So we'll start on Monday with we'll wrap up chapter 3 here and see what happens to Malachi when he, has his final confrontation with the president of his company and he's sort of left alone. We'll see what happens to him when he reads his father's letter, but we're going to move on pretty quickly to the next 2 chapters. So over the weekend, get through chapters. I guess we're on chapters 4 and 5 now. So read the next 2, read chapters 4 and 5, and we'll talk about that on Monday in person on campus in class. So I'm going to stop the recording